In this episode of The Growth Catalyst, I speak with Francisco Fonseca. Francisco is a data-driven storyteller, and he's given us some really interesting tips, hints, and approaches. He believes that customers are the hero, and that brands should act as the guide, something we all know, but I think sometimes we all struggle with the reality of that. He's worked with some amazing startups, and his impact on customer and user growth, those figures tell stories themselves. He gives guidance on how we should experiment, how they should be small, cheap, and quick. He helps us understand how to prioritize those experiments, and actually gives us some really interesting takes on just a simple reframing of a message can be incredibly powerful. So think redeem rather than free. Some really great hints and tips in this episode. So grab a cuppa and enjoy.
Francisco, good morning.
Good morning, Collette.
It's a beautiful day here in sunny Devon.
Beautiful. We don't have many of these, but they're lovely.
We don't. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. I was really interested in the invitation, and I particularly like the no fluff zone.
So we've spoken a couple of times. Obviously, your story is really interesting to how you've got here. And as we say today, we're going to talk about storytelling and data. So tell us about yourself. How have you ended up here? Where did it all start?
So my story is kind of divided in two parts, before 2021 and after 2021. And I was brought up in Portugal. What we used to speak about around the dinner table was storytelling and neuroscience. My mother is a novelist and my sister is a neuroscientist. And I had a keen interest in stories. So I was already doing marketing in Portugal. And I joined a creative writing master's at the University of Exeter. And that's how I ended up moving to England. And so I had to pay my way. And at the time, I found a position at a company called the Hunter Stoves Group. And after a few years, I ended up running the department, the marketing department there for around 4 years. And then unknowingly at the time, in terms of I didn't know what triggered it, I was feeling incredibly unhappy. I didn't know why. I loved the projects I was doing. I loved the team we had and the people I was working with. And when I actually managed to put my finger on it, I realized that I really wanted to be making a difference in people's lives, something that I could see daily. And so I pivoted. I took a maternity leave contract at a company called Thrive. They're an organization that helps schools and multi-academy trusts support children's well-being. And so kind of focused there. I was able to get quite a few wins there. We got almost a 35% increase in lead generation. And then when my contract came to an end, they didn't have enough, they couldn't afford me. And so I ended up finding an opportunity with a startup called Birda. And so, Collette, I don't know if you know the app Strava.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and the concept of Pokemon Go,
Yeah.
so finding birds. So if the two had a baby, that would be Birda. So the whole idea was to get people to spend more time in nature, to improve their well-being, and also to provide data for research, for conservation research.
So combining competitiveness and gaming.
Exactly. So the idea would be there would be a challenge where you'd say, okay, try to find 10 birds during the month of February, and you'd go out. And so people would enjoy seeing their name on the leaderboard. And at the same time, every bird they logged would be put into a reservoir of data for scientists to pull from. And so I started there. I was the sixth hire and the first marketing hire, and we ended up scaling the app from 20,000 to 260,000 registered users, and from about 5 countries to 189. So at the end, it was all around the world. I'll grant that some of those countries in the 189 are just little island states where there is just one person. But no, we did go...
Still reach them.
Yes, we still reach them. And we did go global. At the time, we were kind of earmarked to be the sort of next Duolingo. And we found product market fit with a subset of people that wasn't big enough to support a company that was spending that amount of money per month. Because we were trying to get a big audience. And so at the time, myself and another 2 colleagues got made redundant, and they just kept engineers, and they were trying to find product market fit. But what was really, really interesting in that experience was working in a startup. And the way I like to think about working in a startup is that you're on a ship, there's only X amount of food and you need to find land. And so we can discuss that. But storytelling and structured experimentation, that played a big part. And so what I've been doing since is I've been doing consulting. So I've been helping purpose-driven companies, not only with their stories, but also with their growth experimentation. So really trying to find out what levers you can pull to increase your growth. And so this goes from charities to not-for-profits to companies that are commercial but are doing a mission for good.
So you've mentioned purpose a couple of times.
Yes.
So obviously that's an important component of any project or any role that you're getting involved in.
Yes, it just, I'll explain very quickly why. It just makes it a lot easier to get out of bed for.
Yeah.
Yeah, just feeling purpose. And I think as I got older, and I think my pivot in terms of my career was a very quick or a very sudden realization that time is very short and that we're only here for a short period. And you want to leave your mark in a positive way.
Totally. Yeah, completely understand and respect that. So what specifically would you say is your area of expertise?
So I'd say storytelling. And by storytelling, I want to explain. So storytelling, some people think that these are the stories that I tell my 2-year-old. And although the stories that I tell my 2-year-old have all of these structures and the series that we watch on Netflix, the way I use storytelling as an umbrella term for messaging, for branding, and how that connects to performance marketing and just growth in general. So I would say the 3 things that are sort of pillars of what I do in my career are the messaging and storytelling, are the structured experimentation for growth, and are hands-on leadership. Because I've been the single marketeer and I've led a team of 5. And so no matter what I'm doing, I always want to be hands-on. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you've kind of I understand why you're here, and I've got your sort of core skills. So which are the hard bits of that you have to really understand and kind of start on?
So I have to say that some of the hard bits of the messaging and storytelling is sometimes the internal buy-in, because like I said, there's a misconception about what it is. And so we discussed this before the podcast started, didn't we, Collette? But a lot of organizations still think that by referencing their features or the specific solution that they have, that they're actually reaching anyone. Yeah. And really the only people that they're reaching are the people that are desperate for the solution they have, and they kind of end up going to them. But when I did my marketing degree many, many years ago, they used to talk about you need 7 touch points till you actually convert. And the conversation now is that it's around 25 to 50. And so, wow. Exactly. And so everyone is so busy. There's so much information flying at you from demands at home, from advertising demands. On the way here, I stopped to put petrol. Now there's an actual screen in front of you trying to sell you stuff as you're putting petrol in the car.
Crazy,
yeah, so everyone's trying to get your attention. And people say that there's an attention deficit, that it's because of our screens or TikTok or whatever it is. And now I would very much debate that, because we spend 100 hours in front of Netflix without moving, and we go to work and we're thinking about fictional characters and we're thinking about what's going to happen next in the story. And so there's a very easy explanation for that, which is that our brains are built to understand things in story form. And so the reason for that is because our brains are built to keep us alive. And so if the information comes packaged in a story, where if I tell you that John here ate this berry and he felt terrible, you are going to remember that because that's important for your survival.
Yeah. So trying to get the senior stakeholder buy-in, how do you overcome that?
But it's funnily enough, by telling them stories. but the important thing here, I think, and how this relates to data and to structured experimentation, because we can delve into that later, is that a story by itself is something, has some power. Numbers by themselves mean nothing. No. And so a story with numbers, that's how you really paint a picture. So if you want to get buy-in, you create a narrative that has a hero, a protagonist, that has something that's pushing back. You add stakes to that because no one cares about a story if there's nothing at stake. And then you add the numbers to support that.
Yeah.
And that really gets people's attention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Are there any misconceptions that people generally have about what it is that you do?
In the experimentation realm, I think people understand because it's just the scientific method. Is it if we're going to try grow on this channel, or if we're going to try something, we create a hypothesis and then you work from that. You try to disprove it or prove it. And so people understand that very clearly. They haven't implemented it in their businesses. That's if you'd asked myself a couple of years ago, I wouldn't know what you were talking about. And so having worked in a startup, I was made to understand that.
Yeah.
But in terms of story, people, the misconception is that you have to tell a story that starts once upon a time. And they don't understand that a story can be 2 words. So for example, when Apple created the campaign Think Different. And so that was a story in itself. Yeah. And so I can tell you a short story about that. Steve Jobs was working at Apple around the year that I was born, so I'm giving away my age. So 1983. And they were going to launch the Lisa computer. And so the Lisa computer was the next big thing. It had a mouse. You could actually see files, so you could put things in different places. And they were super excited. And they took out a 9-page, remember 7 or 9, many pages. I think it was a 9-page ad in the New York Times where they listed all of the features and they described their development and how they'd come up with a mouse and everything that it did. And the computer completely tanked. They didn't even cover their development costs. And so Steve Jobs got actually made redundant. He got fired. Yeah. He got fired. And he ended up buying a little company that we nowadays know very well, which is Pixar. And at the time, Pixar was making software for medical companies where they could see 3D imaging.
Really?
Yes. And there was a person there. I always forget his name. I'll remember it in a minute. But there was already using the software to make little movies, little animated movies. And I think that's where you can speak to the genius of Steve Jobs. He realized that they could take that and make it a commercial proposition. And so Disney ended up knocking on the door and they got a 3-film contract. And the first film they made was Toy Story. And so when...
I did not know this.
No, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And then it was a commercial success. And that same year, Apple brought Steve Jobs back, so hired him again.
Yeah.
And they came out with this new campaign. And the new campaign had 2 words, Think Different. And it was based on having these 2 words on posters of icons from the 20th century. So there was Albert Einstein, there was Muhammad Ali, and that in itself tells a story. Yeah. And so I think the misconception is that you need a narrative where really you can build a story into very, very little.
Yeah. I didn't know that story. I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. And that gets my brain going. So, we've talked a lot about neuroscience and my neurodiversity. So think different. I think in today's age, we have to. You can't just continue to do things the same that we ever have done. And, we see that every single day. And then using those icons, that's so clever because if you just think about his story, using Pixar completely differently to how that company was probably originally built and its original mission, but using its skills to underpin what happened next that's utterly brilliant. And that's all about thinking differently.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and
that's a really powerful story.
And I think, Collette, you touched on a really important point, which is there's the image. So let's say Albert Einstein, and there's Think Different. And so what that does in terms of the brain is we have something called schema. And that is just to say that if I see a tail, I'll know that it might be a dog, it might be a lizard. And then if I see it has 4 legs, then it's a dog. And so that's how our brain quickly understands things. And so the art of creating short stories, for example, or very good films is just giving people enough that they fill in the blanks with their own experiences.
Yeah.
And so that's what Apple did incredibly. And people didn't think that they would become the next Einstein, but they did think that there was something there that they themselves identify with.
Yeah. Wow, that's so clever. Okay. We're sort of moving into the section as to what's happening now. So the market, I mean, every single day something seems to change. You know, the pace of technology, I don't even really want to focus too much on AI, but what it's doing economically, socially, politically, you know, there's all sorts of routes that we could take with this. What's the most pressing challenge that you're seeing kind of inside your marketplace at the moment if you're dealing with clients or, you know, in your role today?
So I would say there are two things, and we're going to have to go into AI because AI is the thing.
Can't ignore it.
No, you can't ignore it, and it's how you use it. And I think all of us, people that are professionals, we're trying to keep up and trying to learn. And sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves to know all the techniques and to know. I'll give you a very quick example. I was learning how to create an agent, an AI agent. And 2 months after, ChatGPT just launched an agent mode where the agents are created there for you. So it's difficult because you might be learning things that they're just solutions, but just having an idea about how it can work for you. And so one of the things that I think I've been paying attention to and that has really become a part of my thinking is thinking about use cases in general. So when you find something that you think is interesting and not trying to implement it or even use it in your own work or implement it in your organization because you just think it's cool and interesting. And so what I've seen experts do is just focus on use cases. So how is this going to help me do something better, quicker, and then just test it? And this is the same for the experimentation framework, like the minimal viable test. Mm-hmm. So something that won't break the company if you implement it, and then test it there. So I think it's hard to say what's hype and what is real. There's definitely an incredible pace of change, but I think that's a very important thing. And then the other important thing, and especially in this sector or some of the companies I'm consulting with, and even the commercial ones that I've worked with in the past, is yes, these technologies are incredible, but we need to get our foundations right. And if you don't get the foundations, if you're building on a foundation of, for example, communication where everything is about yourself, and we've been doing this for 20 years, and you don't understand how the brain understands your messages, then no matter if you're accelerating that with AI, you're going to get the same results.
Yeah. Yes. If you're not landing the message properly,
yes,
doing a million of them.
Yeah.
It's a mistake of a million magnitude rather than
exactly
single. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So if you had 15 minutes with a CEO today, what would be the message that you give them? What would you tell them to focus on or to put on their consideration list?
It was, we've discussed frameworks, and this is a framework that I actually learned from a marketer that I worked with a couple of years ago, and it actually simplifies a lot of this communication and story things. And I think with any CEO, obviously they like the big picture, but if I only had 15 minutes, I'd want to give them something that they can work with every day. And this kind of hammers in your customers are the heroes. Your audiences are the heroes. And you want to be you want to be the Gandalf of their story in terms of a reference to Lord of the Ring. You want to give them a map that will help find solutions for their life. And that's why they'll go to you again and again. And so the framework is very simple, and I'll just give you the simplest form of it, is think of an island A and an island B, and your organization is the little boat that takes people from one island to the other. And in island A, for example, my drawing is terrible, but I'll sketch this out on a piece of paper. Island A, it's the people's problems and desires. And so imagine we're talking about toothpaste. So the fact that my teeth might not be as white as what's the norm now would be a social problem for myself. And so that would be one of the problems that I'd include there, and you include several others. And then in terms of the outcomes, Island B, my teeth would be whiter. I'd need to visit the dentist less, so I'd have more time. And so those are the outcomes. And you're always focusing on one island or the other in terms of communication. So you're either giving them the things that people should be worried about and that you have a solution for, or giving them the outcomes. And then just two important parts of this framework. There's the sun. The sun is the why. Why are you doing it? And so in this case, if I'm a toothpaste company, I'm doing it so everyone can feel better about themselves and just have a better life. And what is incredibly important that a lot of leaders forget is that there has to be something pushing back, and you have to name who the antagonist is. Otherwise, no one cares. So above the little islands and above the boat, I'll draw a little cloud with a little lightning bolt, and that's what's pushing back. And so what might be pushing back here in terms of the toothpaste might be just the fact that our modern society is so quick that you can't even find time to brush your teeth. And so you can have any one. Normally what I like to do is pick the biggest antagonist. In terms of Berta, again, it was the pace of modern life that would push us away from nature. So we would stop going outside. Yeah. And so that is a really, really simple way of thinking about not only what you're doing in terms of you're the little ship, how you're helping people go from one place to the other, what's pushing back, why you're doing it, and the outcomes that your customers or your audiences will have from interacting with you.
Yeah, that's a great way of visualizing it. I've never thought about it like that. You often make my palms sweat when we talk about this, when companies should not be talking about their product and services, but actually trying to provide solutions for their customer. Because having been in the digital marketing space for more years than I care to remember, I think we've often failed at that particular bit of story, which is frustrating. But it makes complete sense. Because actually, I think about the adverts and those moments that capture me. Of course, they're usually the most simple, the most beautiful. It makes sense. Who's the? You've talked about Steve Jobs. Who would be the greatest sort of storyteller in terms of brand at the moment that you could point at and say they're fantastic? Because
I would say there's a couple. I would say there's a brand that I look up to very much so because of how everything is weaved together and how everything makes sense. So I think in the marketing space, we all know that kind of golden grail is like integrated marketing, where everything makes sense. The communication, your branding, everything makes sense. And that's a clothing brand called Patagonia.
Yeah, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So from the way they position themselves to how the products are built to the structure of their board in terms of for the planet, everything makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
And so the way I like to think about brands is just like people. They're just other people, the same as countries. They dress in a certain way, they speak in a certain way, they have actions that they normally do, they stand for certain things and they stand against things, which again, that's what some people forget. You got to stand, if you stand for something, you got to stand against other things.
Totally.
And so I think Patagonia is dressed really well for their part in this world.
That's a fascinating brand story, actually. They're hugely profitable. And they're very clear on their story, their purpose, their mission, everything that they make. And I think being an employee, or even would you class yourself as an employee or a Patagonian person? You're joining in that mission. I think it's an amazing brand. Okay, so really interesting. So the actionable advice for those CEOs is to just work out how to simplify, how to tell your story in like you say, if it's on the website within a few seconds, you've got to grab the attention, and you've given us some hints and tips as to how to do that. Just thinking about the islands and the boat between the two.
Yes, and I think when this becomes really, really powerful is when you marry it with experimentation.
Yeah.
And though that's a complete different podcast that we can do one of these days. But in terms of growth frameworks, let's take using growth frameworks to work on our story and our messaging. And I'll just give you a very quick example of the power of just changing words. So at Berda, we had a paywall, and you could go on to the Berda Plus plan. There was a pro plan. And so people were invited up. There was the freemium side, but people were invited to upgrade. And so on the paywall, we had start your free trial. And that got us X amount of conversions. Don't remember the exact number now. But what I do know is when we ran an experiment that we adapted that to redeem your free week, conversions increased by 26%.
Wow, really?
And so
just the different
just-
phrasing, or
just the
we're
different
giving you
phrasing.
something for free rather than you're
Yes.
doing something that we're asking you to do.
Yes. And there's several reasons for this, and I've seen this work in many other instances and other experiments, which is that our decisions are, and there's a lot of evidence to support this, are 80% based on our emotions. And then we have 20% that justifies why we made those decisions. And sometimes we don't realize the order of that process.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you exactly why that did that 20%, but I would wager that it has something to do with the emotional effect, like
Yeah.
you said, of I'm getting something for free, and maybe there's less fear involved in just redeeming something that's already yours.
Yeah.
So yes, so if you can work on your words, so the way I'd explain sometimes what I did to my team of engineers at Berda was that they programmed with zeros and ones, and I program with words. And so it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
When we're building a company, an organization, when we're building a political party, no matter what you're doing, you're building with words.
Yes.
And so, yes, playing with that, so experimenting and knowing that you'll fail more than you win. If you take those two components, I think that's kind of the only map that I know to success.
Yeah. Does it take a brave leader to decide to allow those experiments to
Yes.
to happen?
Very much so. And so in the startup world where I've actually immersed myself in the last 3 years or so, now that is a must. It's you either live or you die.
Yeah.
So you have to very quickly find out. And the only map, and there's experts that I would like to shout out here. It's Matt Lerner is one of them. He used to be the head of growth at PayPal, and he has these amazing ways of looking at growth. And Sean Ellis, who's actually the father of growth in terms of what we know now. As far as I know, that is the only sure way to find growth,
Yeah.
which is to experiment
Yeah.
and to learn very quickly, to fail a lot. And the reason why leaders in general and why everyone is slightly uncomfortable around failure is because it's framed as a negative.
Yeah. So I've been having obviously a number of these conversations, and there's definitely a theme in around experimentation and growth and trust. And I think what I'm garnering so far is the trust is often not there, I think, if we don't truly understand the scale of the experiment. So really understanding how to ring fence it, what you're experimenting on, really making sure that you kind of simplify that experiment. And I think that appears to be something that seems to be quite lost. How do you structure that experiment? Is it a time stamp? Is it a certain set of data, a certain set of customers? And that seems to be the missing component of giving everybody some safety, or feeling that this experiment is okay, whatever way it lands.
Yes.
But it's just nailing down what it is, what the outcome should look like. So back to one of your islands.
Yes.
And actually, what are the metrics that are going to make this experiment win, lose, die, fail?
Yeah. So what I've learned over these few years is it literally is not rocket science. It just demands structure, and so it demands knowing what you're going to work on. And so one of the things that I've learned is that you shouldn't be trying to do everything. So you shouldn't be trying to fix your ads on TikTok and suddenly you're working on your story and doing messaging testing and doing everything at once. You should focus for every quarter, for example, on 2 growth levers that you really believe in. So Matt Lerner has this concept, which is a rate limiting factor. And so if there's always something that's the largest impediment for growth in your organization. And so in the case of Bird at the time, it was retention. And that's the case for many organizations. And if you don't have retention, it doesn't matter how many people you get through the door, because if we were a restaurant and people just walk in through the door and they don't actually sit down to eat or they never come back. And so there, for example, it was very easy to say, okay, let's just focus on retention. Yeah. And I think when you narrow things down like that, it makes things simpler. And then to your point, Collette, de-risking is a major thing. So if it's a large experiment, what you really want to do is to break it down into the smallest part where you can still get some learnings and then build from there. So you want to fail quickly, but you want to fail cheaply.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you just want to be, and I think sometimes it's reframing, people are reframing the word failure with learning. The whole mind map that you need behind it is that these are stepping stones that you're building a ladder. Yeah. And that every time that something doesn't work, you're understanding something that will lead you to the next thing that does work. And I think that's kind of the mental map behind it.
Yeah. So yeah, going back to that, it's a mindset, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any quick wins I mean, that's a very big question, I understand, obviously not organisation specific, but sort of on the back of that, again, if you're just chatting to a CEO of a train company or whatever it could be, is there anything, any quick win that someone could implement around experimentation, for example?
Around experimentation.
Yeah.
I think the quickest win is to try to understand where growth is coming from. And I've actually spoken to 2 companies recently where they're in a wonderful position that we all wish we were in, which is they just have growth.
Right.
And so it's organic, it's word of mouth, it's coming from everywhere. But what they didn't know at the time, and they're still finding out, is where is it actually coming from? Because if you don't know it, you can't scale it.
Yeah.
And you're also dependent on something that you don't understand. Yeah. And so I think what companies and these organizations, what they want is to have some control over their growth. Yeah. So if they just got another round of funding and they've got certain demands where they need to achieve certain metrics, if everything's been going amazingly organically, that's great. But if someone says, okay, now I want you to double that, then how do you do that? Yeah. So the mapping of growth is an awesome way to visualize, and it doesn't need to be incredibly complex. It's enough to see sort of, even if you use something like the simplest version of it, like the sort of pirate funnel, where you can see how we go from awareness and how we move down the funnel, and you try to just focus on the drop off in every section. Yeah. And you kind of see where you have your biggest drop off, because suddenly if you get to the point where people are actually trying your product and they've had their aha moment and the retention completely drops, then you know, okay, the problem is with my product.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Matt talks about it as the messy middle.
Yes.
And we saw quite a bit of that on the back of COVID, where some organisations, some lucky organisations, saw some massive growth and just assumed that it would continue. And then
forever.
Sort of 2022, you could see things going off a cliff, and people didn't know why. They hadn't taken that time to go and find out where that growth actually came from. Was it always just going to be temporary because this was suddenly something that had to be done online because you couldn't do it in real life? Or had you changed the way that people were doing things? And I saw too many companies not really nailing that and are subsequently in quite a bit of trouble.
Yes, and I have to put my hand up that it's very easy to get stuck in the day-to-day, especially even leading like a marketing department and there used to be this concept that I kind of subscribe to, which is the marketing should be busy. You should be doing a bunch of things. You should always be working like beyond your actual capacity, because you should be in every channel, and you should be, and there's something to be said about being seen widely, and that goes back to the 50 touch points, and people need to see you in several places. But if you lose sight of the strategic side and pulling back and actually giving yourself time to do something that's not going to produce results for that day, and that isn't a fire, which is just mapping, just going and checking your data and seeing where are people actually coming from. And actually, if we can go back, my one advice in terms of experimentation, in terms of story, to any leader would be to talk to your customers and to actually talk to them. And there's a interview framework that I've started using over the last 1 or 2 years that's called Jobs to Be Done. And so the whole concept, you can look it up, but the whole concept around it is that you want to find out about all the motivations and about what triggered this person to notice that they were problem aware, that they actually needed something that they needed to find a solution for. And you want to know about their whole journey up until your product. You don't really care about their experience of your product. And when people sit for the interview, sometimes they think you're going to ask them about how did we do today and how, and that really doesn't matter, because what you want to understand is their motivations.
Yeah.
And so at this point in time, I'm working with a little hotel in the south of Portugal, and they're making a sort of boutique rural hotel in an old Alentejo village. And what I'm doing now is I'm talking to people, because the hotel isn't open yet. So that's an added level of complexity, because I don't have clients yet. But I can talk to people who have gone to the area. And what I'm trying to find out is why they went. And so I'll give you a quick example of a very busy professional that I interviewed the other day, who's very, very successful, spends all of his weeks having to make really big decisions. And so it feels completely overwhelmed and disconnected from, as busy professionals ourselves, I think we both can agree, disconnected from ourselves. Only inside of our brain, only thinking logically. And he got home and he has 2 children, and he was there with his wife, and suddenly the kids started arguing with each other and the noise level just went up. They live in Lisbon, which is a capital city. And immediately him and his wife said, okay, let's go to the Alentejo, because it's completely silent. There's cows outside. Well, it's Devon. Let's say it's pretty much Devon. And so that was the trigger. And so when you try to understand the trigger, and what did he want from his experience? The outcome that he wanted was to be in touch with himself again. Yeah. So to have time slow down, to be a better husband to his wife. And that's really important, how he's going to affect people around him. And so now that I know the triggers and now that I know the outcomes, I can definitely position myself better to fulfill those needs.
That's really interesting. So you said you had put your hand up that perhaps you needed to understand that you didn't just need to be busy, that there were things that you could have done. So are there questions that good leaders, a good CEO could have asked you to help you sort of arrive at the to-do list that you're doing now?
Yes. One of them that I actually heard from a growth leader on a different podcast is asking, are these ideas based on customer insights?
Ooh, nice.
And
nice.
So that if everything is based on customer insights, you're going the right direction.
Yeah.
And one important caveat there that I would say is that not all customers are the same to us.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you the case of Berta, which is a very simple example, where you had the freemium and you had the paid version. In the case where our goals changed to scale the paid side, my customers that I would want to base my work and on their insights are our raving fans, are the people that would be incredibly disappointed if Berta were to suddenly fold and disappear, and that pay us. So really, sometimes, and this is a slight tangent, but if you bear with me, sometimes people ask me, oh, who should I be speaking to? Because I support schools, but we support multi-academy trusts and we support local authorities. And my answer at the time, the simplest answer is, who's paying you the most? And so who are you going to talk to on your website, the main thing? And you should definitely talk to other people as well, but who is your main person? And so, yes, the customer insights, if someone asked me that would trigger me straight away into this process of how things should work.
So that question, it made me think, so you're proposing an experiment on some customer insight that you've gathered, and then you're helping prioritize that by saying my most valuable customer buckets are this, and we can work our way down through that customer bucket if it's appropriate.
Yes. And in terms of prioritizing experiments, there's many ways of doing it. One is called ICE, where you just look at impact, confidence, and ease. And really you can have your own scoring model where you can just say, at the time with Berta, the way we simplified it was we just had sort of effort and impact. And you can decide, you create a sort of Excel list of 10 experiments, and you decide which one you're going to work on first, and you kind of work from there. And really what you want is a backlog of experiments, just so you know that if something isn't working very well and you don't have enough data to actually come to a conclusion there, you just stop it inconclusive, move on to the next one, and just work your way through.
Cool. That seems actually very straightforward.
It is. It's literally just getting yourself there are, I don't want to sell it as too simple, because in terms of statistical significance, you need X amount of people for the experiment to actually be valid. And there's all of those aspects. But no matter what you're doing, it's always better than doing nothing and just going on gut feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's obviously from a ZOKRI perspective, the OKR framework just simplifies a hypothesis, really.
Yes.
We can use it for strategic transformation. What's the hypothesis? So what's the experiment? What is it we're testing? What data sets are we using to test it? And what's the time frame and who's involved? Actually,
oh, that's lovely.
Relatively straightforward.
I'm a big fan of frameworks, just because they really focus thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so looking ahead, I mean, this always feels like a pretty impossible question with everything that's going on. As we said, we're not going to turn this into a political broadcast. But over the next 12 months, what do you see as happening? What would you be focusing on over the next 12 months?
If I was the leader of an organization, I think there'd be two things I'd be focusing on. One, which I should have been focusing on all the time, is the people. And so they're literally the parts of everything. They are the entity. To connect it in this podcast, we can connect it back to story. And so we're motivated by money in the sense that we need our basic needs met, and that's really important. But as we've seen, and there's a body of evidence to support this, meaning is the biggest motivator. And so the stories that we tell externally are important, but the stories that we tell internally are equally important. And so in some of the organizations I've worked with, when I changed the positioning of the company and we actually ended up increasing revenue by £1 million, this was the Hunter Stoves Group. I ended up positioning them as an eco leader, which they were already. They were investing £500,000 in research and development. They had reduced plastic. They had replaced the majority of the plastic with cardboard, and they were doing all of these things. They just weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
And so just reframing that story, and I created a bunch of partnerships with the Woodland Trust and different things to strengthen that story. But just reframing that increased our turnover in that year by £1 million.
Wow.
But it also really strengthened the cohesion inside of the team, just because everyone knows what the story is, what they're a part of. It just helps when family members ask you what you do. You say, look, we're one of the leading wood stoves in terms of being eco-friendly. And that element of having the cohesion inside of your team, I think is one of the main things that will lead to success.
I think that's spread across all generations as well. So we've got, Gen X, Gen Z, boomers. There's obviously different experiences, different age groups, and therefore different generations. Today's generation entering the workplace, they have a whole raft of different opportunity of approaching things. And I'm learning from the younger generation all the time that purpose is really important, being proud of what you do rather than just doing what you do because that's the way you've always done it, which might be a boomer attitude, to loving what you do and being proud is a great way to get the right energy. Going back to that neuroscience approach, people are so then passionate and engaged in what they do, they're just focusing on all the good things, and therefore it makes it a great place to work, and therefore makes again, going back to that, people want to go and work for that organization. It's wonderful.
Exactly. And that's the engine, and it's wonderful that over my lifetime and over the last few decades, all companies have kind of understood that.
Yeah.
And I would say initially the majority of it was greenwashing and we're trying for the planet. But I think I'm an optimist in the sense that I think the majority of organizations now actually take these things very seriously. Yeah. And it is literally the power of mindset, I think, Collette. I don't need to sell it to you, but if we tell ourselves different stories, we even affect our bodies in different ways. So there's a famous experiment where they had a milkshake and they divided the group, the sample group, into two. So we had the control group and we had the other group. And the milkshake was exactly the same. But for one group, they said that it was really calorie heavy, it had a lot of fats, that it was quite a negative thing. And the other one, they said that it was the most organic of ingredients and that was really good for them. And then they measured their physiological responses a few weeks later, and they had actually responded to the calorie-dense milkshake as if it actually was. Wow. So the body responds to it and the effects were the same. Yeah. And that's been seen again and again. And so there's another experiment where you have two hamsters living side by side, and one can choose when to run on the wheel, and the other one has to run when the partner runs. The one that has choice and that runs for pleasure had all of the health benefits. The other one that's made to run actually had its health get a lot worse. And so this is just how you can motivate people, how you can get an organization to work beyond the normal. Here's your pay slip, and you have a parking spot. Now that I've seen some job advertising where some of the benefits are completely ridiculous. People don't care about those.
I read something this week, culture theatre.
Yes, that's an awesome term.
Brilliant terminology, because it's absolutely right. We've all been there. I remember when sort of Google first opened its doors and you had bin bags and pods and free food. I thought, how on earth can these people go and work anywhere else ever again? But actually, I think there's a lot more purpose in those workplaces today. But back then it was culture theatre, and I think very easily people went and worked for different organisations with different sets of purposes.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that I've been thinking about quite recently is the majority of work that people do can be seen as mission or purpose driven. And I've really been thinking about that a lot, because the people who I've worked with these last few years that are helping children with their well-being, that are trying to get people all over the world spend more time outside, all of these people, they're happy to do the work. And I think I'm not a fly on the wall when they're at home with their families, but I think it's not only the story that they tell themselves, it's the story that they tell others. They say, this is the work that I'm doing. And the value that we give to that. So, and like the example that I gave you with Hunter Stoves, I don't think anyone needs to make anything up. It's just picking the right elements to really understand your story. And it's funny, in the case of Hunter Stoves, they'd been going on for 20 years, and just the reframing of those elements made everyone think about the company in a different way. So it's literally, what we can see this in films when there's a big motivational speech, where if you can say the right things, if you can understand, you can really motivate people to do their best.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. So the big question the leaders have to ask is, what is our purpose?
Yeah, I forget his second name, Simon Sinek, I think.
Sinek, yeah.
Yeah, the why.
Yeah.
The why is the big thing. And if we go back to that little framework of the island A and island B, it's the sun above it. It's the why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And as humans, we always care why people are doing certain things.
I talk about that in my book, about that institutionalization, where we've learned some terrible behaviours, but actually some of those institutions have done that incredibly well. If we think of the military, you had to be proud. You had to be a proud member of the army or the air force, or whatever that military institution is, because you're then in a tight group with one mission. And
Yes.
you all needed to make sure that everybody was completely on board with that mission. And I think that's something that potentially hasn't necessarily carried across to the sort of the commercial world. I've seen it lacking sort of quite repeatedly. I think you're right. I think there's a big shift. I think leaders are really starting to understand that they need to make sure that they understand what the purpose, what the why is, to make sure that the people are happy and that it's not culture theatre, that people genuinely are proud of working for this organisation and proud of doing what they're doing, because we just all need that, right? I all want to be part of the right club.
Yes, exactly. And I love that example of the military. And I would venture to say that that's doubly strengthened by all of the Hollywood films around the army and the military. And it's just something that people have been brought up on, and that sort of national pride, even if they don't really understand the devastating effects of war. It's the becoming part of a club. Their whole thing was always the sort of police for good around the world. Yeah. And yes, all this is very much story based, and how we perceive the world is how we're going to feel it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I'll share with how people can connect with you. So we'll put your LinkedIn details.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you think we haven't covered today?
No, we've covered a lot of ground. No, yeah, definitely. Anyone has any questions, just reach out on LinkedIn.
Brilliant.
I always enjoy these conversations.